When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's it, everybody. We are back. This is episode 129, How to Become Self-Taught. I'm Matt, that's Mike, and this week we'll be discussing the art of becoming self-taught, as the title very clearly lays out. Now, if this sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can go check us out on Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. And just another brief reminder that Mike is working on that weekly goals app, and there is a public Trello where you can follow along in his journey. Link will be somewhere because we don't have show notes yet. Probably on the Twitter if I remember once again. But this week it's my episode. I wrote out these show notes, and as per usual, they're like 3 pages because I just write as I think. So they're massive. And we got 3 segments here. I'm quote-unquote self-taught is the first one. Second one is how to become self-taught. That's the juicy one. And the third one's going to be like a more personable, whatever, tips and tricks. Matt like tip and tricks. That was weird. You know where my mind went there? It went immediately to Terry Jeffords from Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was like, oh, I can do a joke here. And then I tried to like pull out of the joke in my head too early. And that's why I said tip and tricks, not tips and tricks. And then I just said it, and now it's ridiculous. But there's tips and tricks from Matt and Mike, and Matt is me. So everyone simmer down. And okay, let's just get into it before I dig myself into an even weirder like sitcom hole. But anyway, the title self-taught can be a little overwhelming and is sometimes overused or underused, okay? So in school, in traditional school, like college, university, just doing online courses, whatever it is, right? They will oftentimes only teach you a part or a piece of what you need to know, even for the exam. So if you're doing like a college university course, you got an exam, they're not going to teach you 100% of what's going to be on that exam necessarily. And then they'll leave the rest for you to discover in labs, if you have those, or maybe it's in that same textbook chapter in question, etc. Now, I just want to be clear that a lot of these educational background things I'm talking about is education as it is in Canada, and with a heavy focus on post-secondary, but it can apply in general to other levels of education as well. But your mileage may vary in your country of residence or whatever. Whilst many people would take traditional courses as quote-unquote not self-taught, there are absolutely parts of schools that are self-taught and that essentially teach you how to self-teach, okay? So after completing college, a phrase I heard a lot from colleagues and other students was something along the lines of, college is there to teach you how to learn. Now, whilst this sort of mentality can spark some controversy with people thinking that teachers, instructors, and professors should be teaching as much as possible due to the paid nature of post-secondary education, right? In Canada, you pay for schooling past secondary school, past high school. And so because you're paying, some people are going to be like, hey man, like, you know, I'm paying these people, they should teach me everything. But the reality is that you can get caught into the weeds of something and never really escape. So to kind of explain that and to sort of bring that into the web development world, could you imagine explaining the ins and outs of migrating someone over to a new host? There's literally hundreds of things to consider, and trying to go through all that with your client can take hours. You know, you sort of have your broad idea of we need to bring the files over, maybe we need to bring your email over, we got to configure the DNS differently, we got to figure out where the registrar is and like whether the name's registered and those type of things. But you have to consider the really small things. Like you have to consider things like how your PHP is configured. What version of PHP is there? How much space is on the old server versus the new server? How fast are the servers? Then the list just keeps going and going and going. Now, the same sort of situation can arise in school where let's just say you get taught the basics on something easy. So let's just say lighting up an LED with a circuit. Okay. You're taking a really basic electronics course and they teach you this is how you light up an LED. Okay. Now, they're only going to like cover that first part, let's say, and maybe they'll cover some more specific stuff as we go. But if it's a basic electronics course, they're going to be like, this is how you power an LED. Okay, moving on to the next basic thing, right? But it's an LED, so there's a lot you can do with them. You can flash LEDs, you can fade them and like do like a breathe effect, fade in, fade out, fade in, fade out. Light is different under different diffusers, so you could talk about that, talk about different voltages, how to use pre-made LED boards with common interfaces in a given industry, if that's a thing. And like the list just keeps going, right? So it's like you just think like, oh, why didn't the teacher just teach us all this? It is because there's that sort of getting into the weeds and you'll just never leave. Like, what if they start talking about the type of material that LEDs are made of? Like, it gets crazy. Now, this makes it too much to teach all at once. So the balance of teaching, too much versus too little. So, teaching too much material, getting into the weeds, teaching too little material, avoiding the weeds too much and then actually missing some basics. It's a difficult balance to strike. And this is kind of, in my opinion, where that controversy sort of gets sparked, is because some people are going to be like, hey, man, like I didn't pass the exam because you didn't teach me, A, B, C, D, E. You only taught me A, B. So maybe that teacher didn't go far enough. But if they taught you like A, B, C, D and left E to you, some people are still going to be kind of pissed, but you'd be able to pass because you have the majority of the knowledge for the exam type of thing. So there's like that balance. Some people might only teach A, B, C, etc. Those type of things, right? That's where this controversy comes in. Now, the reason why I even went into this on a quote unquote self-taught thing is because I want to make sure that you understand that even though you went through a traditional schooling, or if you did, you also did some self-teaching. You're not completely foreign to the concept of being like, hey man, like, you got to read this book yourself. Like, you're not completely screwed because there's probably times where the teacher said like, hey, we're going to go through pages 1 through 10 of this chapter. And then you guys, yourselves read 10 through 20. And that 10 through 20 is you actually self-teaching, even though you were ordered to by some institution, by some teacher, by some whatever it was. That is still you self-teaching. So traditionally taught things, you still have some self-teaching in you. Now, if you're a person that, say, didn't go to traditional school, or you're trying to change careers, or you want to try something new, okay, being self-taught relies on you knowing how you learn best and feeding those needs accordingly. This is why it's important to sort of figure out what type of learner you are in general. So if you went to a traditional school, then you need to figure out like, hey, reading the textbook parts was really annoying, but like maybe I did my reading and then went on YouTube and watched something and then I understood it. So maybe you're more of like a visual learner. You like learning via videos and stuff like that. And I'm sure there's official classifications of different types of learners in that. And that's not what we're here about. We're here about just sort of feeding into what you can kind of learn online about a lot of things, but like obviously with a focus on web development. So some people are visual learners, right? Others work best by reading everything. Some like to just get right into the thick of it right away with a more of a sink or swim sort of scenario. They like to just say, how do I make a web page? They Google that and then they go, okay. And then they start with their HTML tags and they get like right into it. Like they're already writing their thing. Some people like to watch a lot of videos first. Some people like to listen to a lot of podcasts first, whatever it is. Now, if you've had a lot of self-teaching experience from your traditional education, to bring it back to that, then you may already know what type of learning best suits you. That's why you have to pay attention to that. You have to see like, oh, did that YouTube video help me more or did reading help me more? And if you don't, it's time to try things out. So you're not just screwed where you have to take some sort of test to figure out what type of learning you are. Just try things out. Remember that all you're trying to do, especially when you're doing self-teaching to take some pressure off of you, is all you're trying to do is add knowledge to your own head. So there's no pressure of a test or of an exam, of student expectations, nothing like that. The goal is that today you don't know how to do something, and then tomorrow or even next year, you now know how to do that thing. That's all you're trying to do in self-teaching. Now, I have this broken down into a few different types of self-teaching sort of tools that will help different types of learners. So I have videos, I have podcasts, I have reading. So that would be articles, guides, documentation, and then practice. So I'll get into the weeds, if you will, of each of these things. So learning things on YouTube is something that we've all done when doing something small, like tying a tie or something. You're just being like, hey, how do I do this? Folding laundry efficiently if you like to be efficient with things, or other small things, right? It's little things where you're just like, oh, how do people get their TV working? My TV isn't working. Oh, you got to do this. You got to like make sure the HDMI is plugged in over here and blah, 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 blah. Those type of things. Just basic one-offs that you're not really trying to learn a skill. You're just sort of like, hey, I need to get this thing done. I'm going to look up a quick tutorial. But as many of you probably know, but some maybe don't, there's a lot of actually great, fully fledged, free courses or guides or whatever you want to call them that people have made on YouTube. There's full PHP guides. There's different, hey, this is how you make a website on WordPress. This is how you start out with WordPress. This is how you make a WordPress theme. This is how you, the topics just keep going and going and going way out of web development and into wherever, right? So, for example, I use videos, okay, to explore topics right now, right? So like let's say, for example, and this is actually a real example. So right now I'm trying to sort of refresh my Canvas knowledge. I kind of played with it in the past and I don't know much about it. HTML Canvas, right? The Canvas tags, whatever. So I fired up a video of a guy making a game in Canvas, and then I just kept pausing and Googling the different topics that he was covering to understand the different commands and workflow better. So what that is an example of is using a video, as a way to feed my need to understand the different parts. So you don't need to be a person that says like, man, it's lazy to just sit there and listen to a video play or watch a video play, because some people would think that. You can use videos as sort of like a hybrid between these other methods that we're going to dive into. You can watch a video to like a minute in or whatever, and you're like, oh, what's that? You pause, maybe you look at the screen, what the guy's doing, and then you go, okay, I'm going to go and Google that. And you go and you Google that, and you're on W3 Schools or wherever it is you're getting your knowledge. And then you read up on, oh, that's what that type of tag is. And that's why he did like a 0.2 here. And that's why they did this and whatever. And that's exactly what I was doing with this guy's video that I was watching. I was like, pausing every couple of minutes, which sounds ridiculous, but I was using the video to sort of fuel my reading because I'm not a person that likes to read a lot. Now, I also find that skipping through videos can actually be as helpful as documentation sometimes. So I'll get into documentation soon and how they're kind of written and that type of thing later. But obviously, you don't need to, read the documentation just to figure out, read the whole documentation just to figure out how to like configure a button, let's say. You want to put up a button on Bootstrap. You're not going to read like the credits of who made Bootstrap through like 1,000 topics all the way to buttons and then read buttons and be like, okay, now I can stop and make my buttons, right? And people sometimes treat videos like as if they're like a check mark where you have to complete the video. I don't do that. Sometimes if I haven't finished it, but if I finish this guy's Canvas tutorial, finish it out, and then I think like, man, like I forget how we did this context thing, which is a thing you mess with in Canvas. I forget this context thing. I'm going to skip through until I find that part and go with it. So just like how documentation is like you control F or you search through to find the button chapter if you're trying to figure out how to do a Bootstrap button, like I said, videos can serve the same purpose, where maybe you're more of a visual learner, but you don't need to watch that whole video again. And I feel like there's a weird, and it's I'm finding it like amongst my friends, so it's a very small sample size, so I could just be, completely wrong, but I do find that people think that videos and some other things like podcasts, which we'll get into, need to be sort of checked off. You need to listen to the whole thing, watch the whole thing, and get the check mark. And that's not true. You are trying to get that knowledge into your head. You're trying to get your knowledge of whatever task, whatever thing, in this case, Canvas, into my head. That's what I'm trying to do. Get Canvas knowledge into my head. I'm not going to sit there and listen to this guy's intro 4 times. I'm going to skip through the video and use it like a piece of documentation. Use it like the W3 Schools articles. Use it like the MDN or whatever website I'm using. Different, like I'm going to use these tools to further my knowledge. I'm not going to say like, oh, I watched his whole video, like, now I get the check mark. So I know that might sound weird to you. You might be like, what is he going on about? There are people out there that want that check mark, like, oh, I've completed playing this. And that's just not necessary. Like who cares? Okay. So that's just something I did want to bring attention to. Now, with podcasts are similar to video in that you're quote unquote watching, or more specifically listening, obviously, to someone who's doing something else. So I'm talking about audio podcasts, not video podcasts in this case. So, you're listening to someone do something. They're doing something, they're describing something as they go along, or they're summarizing it after the fact. So they're talking about, hey, I went and I did this, and this is how I got through it. Like, it was really, really hard, but I got Canvas to work this way. Or this was really hard, but I got, my database to not be corrupted anymore when I did this. Or I got rid of this WordPress error because last week I had this issue and this is how I solved it. So you're listening to what they're saying. Now, the great part about this and the difference between video and podcast is obviously podcasts, in this case, again, audio podcasts, it doesn't have the visual medium. Excuse me. It doesn't have the video part, the visual part, visual medium, whatever you want to call it. But it absolutely does bring the ability to multitask. Okay, so there's the strength of it. So yeah, you're losing the visual part of it. You're losing that. It's gone. But you're gaining the ability to continue working if you're working on something, reasonably easy, because listening to a complex podcast and doing complex work just doesn't work, or at least not for me. But you can be working, you could be exercising, walking around, doing your house cleaning, whatever, and you can continue to learn. So podcasts is less interactive. You're cutting that, but you're adding the multitasking friendly, or multitasking. It is multitasking friendly, basically. And so they serve a similar purpose. Podcasts and videos serve a very similar purpose because someone else is doing something and you're listening or watching them do it, right? Or listening and watching them describe it. But it's just one's more interactive, where if you're a visual person, you're going to really enjoy videos. But if you're whether you're a visual person or just an audio person, if you are a person that goes like, I want to keep learning, I'm not going to learn as efficiently from podcasting, but like normally I would just be going out on a jog. I'm going to go and listen to a podcast. Or if you're a person that's super into exercise, but you really want to learn something, so obviously you're spending a lot of time doing that, you're going to throw on that podcast. And if you're an audio learner, like if you're a person that can just like listen and learn, then you're going to have a huge benefit to, like, you're going to be exercising, so whatever, and then you're going to be for your body or whatever, and then you're going to be gaining that knowledge at the same time, or cleaning your house, same time, or playing a video game that's really passive, same time. So now you're getting like your fun and your fun and your professional done too. And I actually do that a lot. Not to get into the weeds of that, but I do that a lot, where sometimes I just I'm fed up with working for the day, or I'm done working for the day and it's late and I'm just like, man, I don't want to be working anymore. Well, I will combine me putting on an education or an informative, whatever you want to call it, podcast on with a game that I'm playing that's really passive, that I've beat it before. I don't really need to hear it, or like I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. And so I'm able to have my leisure time and sort of get away from work, but I'm also still learning. So it's sort of like that multitasking thing. So that's really the benefit that podcasts bring. Now, the next one is reading articles, guides, and documentation. Basically just reading through things, right? So if you're a person that prefers reading, so you're a person that, you would prefer to read the textbook in a traditional sort of class setting, there's a plethora of articles, guides, and other written material out there for you on almost a countless amount of topics, right? There's, makeup guides, there's computer fixing guides, there's desk building guides, there's woodworking guides, there's upholstering, furniture guide. Like it's all over the place. And it's the same with video and podcasts and those type of things too. Now, written material is the king of quick referencing. Whilst you can quickly skip to a part of a video or a podcast, like I said, you still have to watch or listen to what's being said or shown. So it's slow. You skip to it, so that's faster than listening to the whole thing, but you still got to listen to that 2 minutes. But if you just want to figure out where the heck the color property is of a button, you just skip to the button chapter, Control F, color, there it is. And you know what I mean? It is faster. King of quick referencing. And this is actually where documentation kind of comes in. Documentation in general is typically written so that it is for a quick reference guide. Okay, it's for quick referencing. Now, yes, there's a subset of people who learn, and there's nothing wrong with it, where people say, read the whole damn manual before you start doing anything. And those people like to get all the information in so that they're not doing something inefficiently or doing something without realizing that there was an easier way to do it or whatever it is, or a proper way to do it, or a way that would result in less wear and tear on something if it's something physical that they're working on. So those people like to read the whole manual. But documentation is generally written for the quick referencer. So if you're a person that just likes to jump in, but you're like, damn, I can't, like, where the hell is this color property? You're not going to read the whole 2,000 page manual. You're just going to go look for the color property. And that's the king of this. So the benefit here is that there's tons of stuff to read. Articles, guides, documentation, etc. But the great part about this is you kind of have a companionship there, meaning in terms of the reading medium. So if you will, or the written medium, I guess. So it'd be like you can go and read, maybe your favorite influencer writes a bunch of articles on how Elementor works. I don't know how Elementor works. So you go in and you're always reading his guides, reading her guides, whatever. And then you get through it and you're like, hey, you know, like that was pretty informative. I'm going to go make my own website. So you go and you boot up Elementor and you're like, damn, why can't I get this page to work? Where the hell is this name property? Well, are you going to go back through that person's article? Maybe. But in general, documentation will help you. So you have like a companion. So you get, you know, you can kind of get the two-edged, I almost said a two-edged sword, but like it's not bad. It's like you're getting both sides of the coin. You're getting sort of like the article, which is usually kind of phrased like the influencer would, right? So it's a little bit of entertainment value in there. It's like you like how this person phrases their article, right? But then you're also getting the very direct documentation route where you're just like, where the heck is this name property? And so that's one benefit of the written, whatever medium, is because you're getting sort of that shift or that difference and that companionship of those two different but very similar types of written medium in one sort of way to learn. Now, next one, and I think this one needs to be used all the time, is practice. Literally entitled Practice, Practice, Practice in the notes in front of me. Programming anything requires a lot of practice. This goes for other related tasks like system admin tasks, right? And even more for creative things like writing, which is something that you'll actually need to do if you're making a project public on GitHub, for example, right? You'll actually be like, need to write a README file. If people start using your thing, like they need to know where the APIs are or how they install it or whatever. So you got to have a little bit of writing skill, right? Now, while learning via watching, like the YouTube videos, listening via the podcast, like I said, or reading on whatever type of reading you're doing is very valuable, rarely do these methods ever really replace practice. You can read tons of books, watch endless videos on a given topic, whatever, but it doesn't replace the need for getting your hands dirty and actually working on that shiny new project. It's sort of like the thing when someone is, you know how, I guess I don't know whether this would be something like, not specific to me, but specific to people that listen to, let's say like true crime podcast is a good example. Now, I'm not going to pick a certain case or anything, but I listen to the odd true crime podcast. And like you sitting there as like sort of the armchair detective, as people would say, you're listening to this case and you're like, man, why didn't the police do this? Man, why didn't this witness do this? Why didn't the judge do this? But then you get like that one little itty bitty piece of information later on and you're like, oh, that makes so much more sense. And the reason why you didn't have that is because you're not in it. You're not in the case. You're not like a police officer on the case. You're not a PI on the case. You're not whatever. And so you're only getting this presented thing. And so that goes back to that weeds argument, right? That goes back to that weeds argument. It's because Mike and I right now are teaching you something. You're listening to this and you're learning something. But I'm skipping through with bullet points. We're not getting into the weeds of how YouTube videos work. We're not getting into the weeds of other websites other than YouTube that have courses. We're not getting into the weeds of where you can go and learn stuff online. We're getting into the basics, right? And so when you take this information and go, I'm going to self-teach myself how to do pottery. Like I'm going to make my own like clay pots for my plants. There you go. Well, you're going to take this information, go to YouTube, and then you might be like, hey, wait a second. There's way better videos on Vimeo. Hey, wait a second. There's way better videos on Udemy. Hey, wait a sec. There's way better videos on this random person's site. That's the weeds. That's the thing that we didn't cover because it's too much for us to cover in one episode. We could be talking about how the YouTube algorithm works for the next 10 years and it would keep changing. And we could just keep having episodes on that, and you're getting too into the weeds. And so this is something that comes in. So practice, practice, practice. You want to watch that guy do, in my case, that guy do the Canvas tutorial? You want to watch that guy do the Canvas tutorial? Well, that's all well and good, but I haven't actually wrote it down. Like, I haven't typed it out. I haven't done that code myself. So if I were to sit down, I'd be like, damn. And I'd immediately go back to his video to like actually figure out how to start my file, because I can't remember that and I haven't practiced it. So in most, if not all cases, you need to be in it. You need to be practicing it. You need to get your hands dirty, right? And I want to be clear here, which is, it probably goes without saying, but I do want to say, like, if you're a person like listening to a documentary on like a true crime thing or something, don't go and get your hands dirty. Just enjoy it for its entertainment value or for your own knowledge or whatever. Don't be trying to get into a case. That's crazy without some sort of official okay, right? Don't be trying to like get into a case or whatever. Don't get yourself in trouble. But the point is, like, if you're listening to somebody talk about programming and you're interested in programming, I mean, go try some programming. You could read 1,000 books on Java, and then you get there and you're like, crap, what's this variable mean? But you would know that if you tried it. It's the same reason why a lot of times teachers, go back to traditional learning, teachers will make you listen and take notes because you're reading and writing. Or you're listening and writing. So you're doing kind of the both things. You're getting like the audible presentation version, right? Sometimes they're drawing it on the board and then you're writing it down as well to retain it. But then you have homework after because you need to do it again and again and again to remember it. And even then, school doesn't offer enough time for you to master something. You're not going to master advanced functions because you had a 4-month or whatever, how long it is, 6-month long advanced functions course. You're not going to master advanced functions. Like, that's just not going to happen. Like, you're supposed to be doing advanced functions all the time in order to master it. There's a reason why if I take like a summer golf course where I'm like, someone teach me how to golf, I might understand the basics and be able to like go on the course now, understand the rules and hit the ball right. But I'm not going to become Tiger Woods. Like, that's ridiculous. Right. So just something to keep in mind is, in my opinion, you have to practice. But also there's no shame in not practicing if you're just dabbling in it.
Yeah. And before we get into the tips and tricks, I think you've brought up so many good points here. I just want to highlight a couple of them to kind of reiterate and expand on a little bit. So the first point you made in this whole segment is really important to figure out, which is becoming self-taught relies on you knowing how to learn and then feeding those needs accordingly. Like, you have no idea how much quicker it is you'll pick up topics when you figure out your special formula. And I'm putting air quotes up, obviously there's no camera, but your special formula is an important thing to figure out and how you learn something. And it's something that school is kind of anti helping you figure it out, because school is very like cookie cutter. Like, this is how we want you to learn. Read these books, listen to this lecture, do these assignments. That's not necessarily how everyone learns best. And when you're out of school and you're going into a new topic, you've got to figure out what is that thing that will, increase your learning capacity by 2, 3, 4, 5 times and be able to pick up new topics really quickly. And it's important to invest a little bit of time up front into figuring that out. So when you're going into a new topic, figure out, watch a video on it, like Matt's saying, listen to a podcast, read an article, and then do some practicing. Do all the things and see what sticks the most for you. And then, combine them in a way that makes it so that they stick and it creates the best learning environment for you. Because you're not stuck into any one of these things. No one is telling you that you can only use videos to be able to learn this topic. You can only, read articles. No, you have all of the resources of the internet. You have all the resources of public libraries. You have all the resources of mentors out there. Like, that's another thing that we didn't mention here, but mentorship is a big one. Like, you can go out and find masterminds, find groups out there that kind of have like-minded people and get them to help you out. We have a Discord server that's kind of good for that, not to plug it, but regardless, the HTML things Discord server, you can come in there. But regardless, there's just so many ways for you to learn. Never put yourself in that cookie cutter, typical school scenario where you have to do something to get something done. It's just going to kind of put it more into a grind for you. And you're just going to go back to those same ways that you went through school where you just kind of, I mean, not everyone's the same, but for me especially, it was more of just like, I need to get this done rather than I need to learn this thing. The other thing here that I've highlighted is the fact that you can multitask while doing it. So the reason that I want to talk about it is I've been doing this a lot lately, and it's been kind of helping me become better at programming and become better at business and self-development and stuff like that. I've been doing like, I've been essentially reading a regular book on like some sort of self-development thing. I've been listening to podcasts while like cleaning or something like that, doing any sort of random chores or exercising. And I've been also listening to an audiobook on the way to. The audiobook is either like, it's also something to do with business or programming or something. So I've been trying to kind of do as much as I possibly can while I have the time. And I know this might seem like it's kind of overwhelming to some people, but really if you want to do something right, if you want to get into it, you got to kind of engulf yourself to the point where you're enjoying the content. Like I'm legitimately enjoying the books that I'm reading. I'm not doing it just because I have to. I like these business books that I'm reading. I like the programming stuff that I'm learning. And it's making it a lot easier for me to go into this kind of material. And that's another part of that discovery process. Like, what do you like to do? Like on the off chance that you have some time and you want to do something that you're enjoying to do, that you enjoy to do, then figure out, is that a podcast that you want to listen to? Is that a YouTube video that you want to watch? And those are the kinds of things that you can throw on later on to kind of have that like multitask learning sessions. And this is again part of your route to figuring out what the best learning method is for you.
Yeah. Honestly, it's super, super, super important that you find out what you like to do with learning. And the thing is, like I've said before, is because you're probably listening to this and you're not going to a traditional school, or maybe you are, but even if you aren't, if you are or you aren't, it's important to know that when you're self-teaching yourself something that is not related to traditional school, there is no pressure on you except for the pressure you put on yourself. So if you're a person that gets super anxious at tests and keeping up with the Joneses, effectively keeping up with your classmates, those things are gone now. You don't even need to tell anyone that you're going to learn programming at all. If you're a person that is going for accounting or went for accounting at a traditional school, and then you now want to learn programming, use the skills of like how you like to learn from your traditional schooling, even though it's a different topic, and use those to try to teach yourself programming. You don't even need to tell anyone. And the benefit of not telling anybody is that there's no pressure. Pressure is like a reason why a lot of us don't do things, and pressure can be put on us by ourselves, by other people, by institutions, by money, whatever. But in this case, if you're just commuting and you want to learn programming and you really don't know if you do, throw on a podcast. If you're like, man, I like this, but I can't learn just from listening, then maybe add a little bit of one of the programming learning apps. Oh, I don't like doing this on my phone. Okay, try it on your computer now. Wherever the journey is going to take you. What's going to happen? Like yesterday, you didn't even know what an HTML tag is. Tomorrow, you know what CSS and HTML is. What's the difference? And there's no one sitting there being like, in section 7 of your test, you will have to distinctly remember what these acronyms mean, HTML and CSS. There's no one standing there doing that to you. So you're really in charge when you're doing this self-learning journey. You're in charge of your own destiny. You can learn something that isn't even a useful skill for making money. Because some people will argue, hey, you should only be learning skills that will make you money. Well, not really. I learn a whole bunch of stuff about video games in order to play them better. And I'm not a professional gamer. It's because that's my off time. And that's what I'm doing. And that's my passion. And that's my hobby. And that's what I'm doing. So if you're a person that likes to learn a bunch of stuff, go for it. You don't need to worry about keeping up with the classmates and all that rest of that stuff. I think that really concludes that segment. Unless we have anything else sort of offer, Mike, I think we can move into the more conversational, I guess, section, which is the tips and tricks.
Let's go.
Let's do it. So I have a subsection and Mike has a subsection, so I'll just go first here. So don't be afraid of not completing things, like not reading all the way through. And I mentioned this in the show a couple times, not reading all the way through or watching till the end. Get your information and get out. So one of the things that happens to us, meaning people that like to get the check mark, like to complete things, like to be completionists, if you will, is that we will force ourselves to do things even if we don't like them. For example, people say, I know I'm 3 seasons into this show, I have to finish it. And I hate this show, but I have to watch all 7 seasons. Do you? I mean, maybe you want to know the story, whatever, like, you know, it's up to you, but do you need to complete that 7th season? Like all the way through 7 and including 7? Do you need to do that? No, you don't. And I'll say this right now. So I'm listening to a pretty famous podcast called Up and Vanished, and by Payne Lindsay, whatever. And I was getting annoyed with it because I was trying to listen to every episode, and they have episodes, like it'll be like, you know, season 1, episode 1, etc. So they have episodes. They have like sort of a spin-off-ish episode type called Case Evidence, and then they have another episode type where there's a couple. There's Q&As. There's like bonus episodes, or just sometimes Q&As, whatever. And then there's like bonus live episodes. And I was just getting pissed off. Like I was like, man, I can't, like I'm listening to 2 hours or something or whatever of this podcast, or 2 episodes, 3 episodes. And I'm getting like 2 minutes of what felt like 2 minutes of actual content on this case. And I was like, I'm just interested in the case, right? I'm just interested in this case. I'm not like, I don't need to know what Jim from some random town needs to like has an opinion on a piece of it. Like I don't care. And that's almost like a social media content now, or comment. Now, some people are super into the case, and some people love those episodes. People like to participate in those episodes. That's fine. But I felt obligated, even though this is just like a thing I'm doing on the side. I'm not doing this professionally. I'm listening to a podcast. Felt obligated to finish the show. Like I felt obligated to listen to every episode. And then I talked to a friend who is also listening to the show, or listened. I think she's done it. And she said, you know, you don't get a lot of information, if that's what you're after, out of the Q&A and the live episodes. So she's like, there's a couple that are good, but you know, you're not going to lose much. So maybe you can just listen to the episodes, or listen to the episodes and the case evidence ones, because those are pretty interesting and actually pretty insightful. And that's exactly what I did. And now I'm ripping through that podcast because I'm not being a completionist, and I'm actually enjoying it more. And I'm just marking the Q&As and stuff as done. But this goes back to the point of, you take it into self-learning, you know, away from this sort of leisurely podcast that I'm listening to, or podcast that I'm listening to on my leisurely time. It's on a pretty serious topic. The podcast is, but I'm listening to this on my off time, and like I'm being completionist in my off time. So you can imagine people that are like, I have to know everything I can put into an HTML tag. Well, you're gonna be there for like a year. Like maybe not that long, but like you're going to be there for a while. Like all the different options, the history of it, HTML4 and like, you know, HTML1 and you know, like what crazy. Like you're not like that's too much. So people, I think you just need to step back and don't be so completionist.
I think last week we had a conversation on the whole Webpack conversation where you were kind of treating it as a completionist thing where you wanted to learn everything about the full tech stack before jumping in. And that was an incorrect approach. That's something that I said was an incorrect approach, because it's delaying you actually getting into the stuff that does matter, the actual coding, where you're just going to overwhelm yourself the more you do it. So the more completionist you are technically, especially when you're first starting out, and especially if you're talking about a large amount of like a big project that if you want to do, and you want to learn every single piece before you jump in, you're not going to get you're not going to do it, period. It's just not going to happen. So being a completionist is not only like going to slow you down, it might stop you from learning things. So you've got to kind of, you know what stuff to learn, and that'll come with time. At first you'll want to probably read more, listen to more, and eventually once you start actually jumping into projects and solving them and figuring out how to do it, you'll know where to stop. But you have to have that mindset that like, I don't need to read this whole thing. I don't need to listen to this whole thing before you can get there.
And I'll actually say one, and this is like a personal thing that happened to me, but, and I mentioned this on the show before. So I mentioned that like I went through school, like high school, and I took like all the big maths. So I took like, talk about grade 12, we're talking advanced functions and then calculus. And those are considered like the big difficult math courses. And one of the things I noticed was I was doing well in math throughout my like journey of school, like of high school. Like I was doing well in grade 9, I did well in grade 10, started doing in grade 11, and then it was like bad in like grade 12. And I did well in calculus actually because I kind of like cracked my own code. So one of my teachers actually said, you know, and I'm not going to name names, one of my teachers actually said, the person that was teaching advanced functions said something along the lines of, in grade 9, we teach you everything. In grade 10, we teach you most of everything. In grade 11, we kind of teach you like a little, like less, like every year it gets less and less. So in grade like 11, we teach you like whatever it is. I'm paraphrasing from memory, but like half of the stuff you need to know. And then like, you know, in grade 12, maybe it's 50% or 25%. It's even a little bit less, whatever. Like it's less than, so every year it gets less and less and less. So they teach you everything in grade 9, less in grade 10, less in grade 11, less in grade 12. And what I found was I did well in calculus, or like pretty well, but I did the best during units where I actually understood what I was doing. I did not understand what I was doing on the paper. Like I was just following the rules, carry the 2, move this bracket. I don't know what I'm actually doing. Like is this making a shuttle to go to space? Or am I calculating how my eyeball sees? I literally don't know. And one of the units I remember was where I kind of cracked the code, and this is where I did better in calculus. I know I'm not amazing, but I'm not a math whiz by any means. But I read the textbook, even though we were told, you know, we weren't told to. I read the textbook on how the actual thing worked, like what I was doing on this particular unit. And then like, this was literally like the night before the test, and the whole unit fell together in my head, and I got 98 on that test because I just understood what the fuck was going on. And so as a result, now I treat everything like if I don't understand everything about something, I'm going to either struggle with it, screw it up, not do well, not get it. And I think that like that's what's tainted me this whole time, is because having, you know, suffered through advanced functions effectively, and then suffered through calculus to the point of that unit, and then being like, holy crap, this makes a lot more sense. You know, it worked in that particular context, but I think I'm extrapolating that too much. Because I had a bunch of other courses that I didn't do that in, and I did fine in them, you know what I mean? But I just took that like, this is very hard. So when I learn better when I understand what I'm doing. So therefore, I should learn absolutely, positively everything. But when it comes to tech, there's too much on the table, too much on the plate, and I just can't. And so like, just like I know this is an aside in a brief like personal story, but that is legitimately why I do that. And it's going to be hard for me to kick the habit, but I need to. Definitely. My next tip and trick is don't worry about here we go, like related to the same thing again. Don't worry about understanding every little thing until you start practicing, and even then, you know, more knowledge comes with more time spent practicing and learning. So, for example, the first thing comes to mind when I say this is, you know, when you're on the job and like you start a new job. So you're on the job, first day, guy comes around, whatever, your boss. I'm just trying to think of like a specific scenario that I went through, but without naming names. So like, let's say, yeah, I know one. So I worked in a factory one time, and like they were like, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to load these boxes onto these like skids, and someone else is going to do the UPC codes, the like barcodes. And normally you would do that, but just don't worry about it. And so you just sort of leave that alone, and you don't understand that. But as I got better at like loading the skids on, because it was a very particular way to load them on, as I got better at that, then they taught me how to do the codes. And then I started doing the codes as well. Whereas if I had done both, I probably wouldn't have been able to handle it. But they were trying to slowly introduce me to it. And this is actually something that I don't do in my own self-learning, but you should do, and I should also do, got to get into the habit of, is if you learn how to import a database, and you just import databases all day from zip files, whatever, and you learn how to do that, but you don't really understand what's going on. And then one day you hit the hiccup of the database being too big to import. Now you're diving into PHP INI files, you know, upload limits, you're diving into compression and if you can compress the database and, whatever, splitting it up into parts or like whatever. And this is where your splitting it into parts helps you. Like you were taught or you'd self-taught yourself to import the databases, but now you need to know about this other stuff and you're Googling it. And so you've mastered importing. Now you need to further your knowledge with like learning INI files or whatever. But if you were to learn about INI files, upload limits, all that while you're learning how to import, all that stuff is in your head all at the same time. And that's where it starts getting messy because you're going to be like, holy crap, this is complex. And you're going to start freaking out. And it's true. Like you will start being like, what am I doing here? Like this is too much. This is all over the place. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Because with something like sysadmin, learning Linux commands might sound confusing, but then that becomes, that becomes secondary. Like that becomes just muscle memory. And then the complexity comes from you actually understanding how the hell Linux works and how the hell to actually use those tools and use those commands to make other things work. Usually with no user interface. But learning it all at once, no way.
I think to go back to your math example where, it taught you or it kind of programmed you to have to dive in really deep before you start. There's nothing wrong with learning a chunk of something really well. So when you're starting, let's say, a project that has, a back end, a front end, deployment, like you have to do the deployment, production deployment, you have to do the database and stuff like that. That in itself is very intimidating. But let's say you break that part, all those parts up into little chunks, and you want to really learn how to do the front end really well. And you do a lot of like research on that, and then you start the front end. I don't think that or like a certain portion of the front end or something like that, I don't think it's a problem in that sense to have that kind of, I don't know if it's a completionist mentality or a deep dive mentality, whatever you want to call it, that mentality of having to kind of learn the ins and outs of something before you start. I think you can apply that mentality as long as you break up your project into doable chunks. And that's the same thing with your math, right? So when you were doing your calculus, you're not going to learn all of calculus. You're not going to learn how calculus works from the ground up. What you probably did, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is like your unit that you were doing, you dove in and you learned what the hell you were doing during that time, like whatever it is, a derivative, whatever it was at the time that you were doing. You learned how that worked really well. And that was a building block for you to be able to figure out what else is going on. That you can apply that same skill and same kind of, I guess, tenacity or whatever you want to call it to learning web development by just breaking up your project into doable small chunks.
That's interesting. Because most recently I'm doing this, and this is like my weekly growth goal, but like I've been doing the media player. And I tried to dive in and was like, okay, I need to know how this media player works overall. And I started reading and immediately was like, okay, each of these parts, like, play button, pause button, volume buttons, they're pretty easy. But holy crap, is this confusing with CSS and HTML and JS all mixed in.
Yes.
And like, I was like, holy frick. And so I was forced to be like, okay, how am I going to get this play button to work? Oh, okay, this tag's wrong. I'll fix this. Okay, now I've done this. Okay, let's get a stop button. Let's did it. Oh, you know what? I don't actually like I got it working, but I don't like the stop button. Like I don't need it. Get rid of it. Like doing it piecemeal really worked. But like getting into it, even though it's like an easy enough to use API, it's just too much all at once.
Yeah, especially when you combine the three different aspects like the HTML, CSS, JS, whereas you can just like hone in on one of them. Like say first you do the layout really well with HTML and CSS, and then you hone in just on the JavaScript side of making the play button work. And you deep dive into that and you figure out what the best way to do that is and stuff like that. I'm assuming that's how you've been kind of going at it or similarly.
Yeah, I grabbed the Mozilla whatever documentation network or whatever they call it. I never remember the name, but the Mozilla like whatever it is. they had an example of a video, and I just literally took that whole thing, copied it in, made it work on Webflow. Then I changed that to audio, and then now I've drastically, like, it's basically not even their code anymore. Like, I've just completely ripped it a new one. But like, it allowed me to go like, okay, I need to work on play pause. Where's the play pause function? Here it is. Okay, I don't like how this works. And then I like, rip it all to shreds and fix it up. And that's how I've been doing it. But I guess like getting that big example code helped me get over the hump of being like, I need everything at once. Because then I was like, okay, I have a working media player. Now I'll work on this. But for some reason, I was just like not willing to go through each button. I think that might be a problem that I need to work through as well. Like you're saying, like it's definitely from that calculus class, or it's the very first thing I always think of. Like, I did really well in that one test because I knew what the F was going on. So like, I really should do that again. And I'm extrapolating it to too many situations. I think that's the issue. You know what, actually, and this is going to sound crazy. I do this a lot, even in games. I don't try things. I read up on them first. And it's a game, who cares? But I still do it. I still read up on them first. Bizarre. Like I think it's just something I need to get out of for sure. It's something I need to obviously read up on stuff, but like within reason. But I'm like scared to try stuff. I don't try anything. I don't try anything like hardly at all.
That math class messed you up, dude.
It's bad. Like yeah. So that's interesting. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, it's just like, it was me too. Like, it wasn't like the teacher did it to me. It was like, I literally did it to myself. Like, I read that textbook. I made that mentality. The one that did it. Like, it was all me. Bizarre. But yeah, I don't know. Interesting insight. And then my last tip and trick, just to kind of get through it, is I like to mix and match my learning experience with a collection of videos, podcasts, and documentation, as well as practice. So practice kind of goes hand in hand. Like I said, like usually or almost always, if not always, you need practice with your preferred method of learning. But if I'm being lazy, I turn on a video. If I'm just getting introduced to something, I turn on a video. If I am getting into it, I start looking at the written materials. If I'm really enjoying learning about something, but I need to do actual work that day, or like I need to go out somewhere or drive somewhere, I'll turn on a podcast. Or who am I kidding? My car's not new enough to have a headphone jack. So I don't do that. But like my commutes are silent. But I will listen to a podcast like when I am playing like a game, or when I'm, whatever, cleaning something up, or if I'm unboxing some stuff from Amazon or some other sort of like in-home task, if you will, then I'm listening to a podcast almost always. So that's kind of how I continue my learning. And that's kind of where I'm at, where I like a mix and match of everything. And I learn best with video plus, practice. But podcasting helps me not be anxious about not continuing my video learning.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah. Honestly, I kind of do the same thing. I'm in that same, like, I do a very big mix of stuff, but I've got it down where I like, if I'm going into a new topic, I watch a video on the topic, like anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes. I don't go too ham on it. If it's like a longer video, I will skip it around, like you were saying before, and then I just dive right in. And then from there, I learn what I'm missing the most, because by diving right in, after having that a little bit of an introduction on how to get started and stuff like that, I'm able to figure out what I know, what I can figure out on my own, what the documentation will allow me to do. So I obviously, while I'm setting everything up, I have the documentation pulled up on one of my monitors. And then also what I will need to kind of like deep dive on. So if it's something like, user authentication is a little bit confusing in this backend, I'll deep dive on that using like more videos or articles, or deep dive into the documentation, or go on a Discord group and ask them. I've used all those methods, but that's my accelerated approach at this point to learning a new topic. And it's been very consistent, I'd say, for the last couple of years. That's how I've picked up technologies. Like, that's how I learned Sanity. That's how I learned Strappy. That's how I learned Vue. That's how I learned React. That's how I learned Flutter. Like, literally any new technology I've learned, that's been my approach, and it's worked. And that's why I was so like adamant on like this is what you should figure out first. What is your approach? Because once you figure that out, there's no topic that will like intimidate you. There's nothing that will be like, okay, I can't figure that out. I'm not going to learn this because I don't want to put the effort into learning it, because in the end, as long as it's something that's well documented, and you'll figure that out really quickly as well, it's all doable as long as you understand the core concepts. And to bring it to my tips and tricks, one of mine is learn the basics first. So if you're diving brand new into something like web development, you can apply this to any skills that you want to learn. Find out the core basics. And for web development, that would be JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and learn how they work to a certain degree. Don't spend years learning each and every one of them, but make sure that you can kind of do the basics that you need to do with them. You want to build a website with them. You want to control some reactive stuff on your page with JavaScript. You want to lay out your website so that it works great with mobile and not mobile, and it looks decent. Maybe do a little bit of animations. Like, you want to learn them pretty intricately, because again, we've said this a million times on the podcast, once you have those basics down, it's so much easier to go in and then learn something like Vue, or go and learn React, or go and learn WordPress, or whatever. It's just one of those, like, it's a building block, and building blocks are really important when you're learning new skills. That's kind of like my base advice. Then I have a couple other things here. One of them is figure out what you want to do with your skills before diving into learning. So when you're going and learning something new, you need to have that motivation. You need to have something that will drive you. If it's something like, hey, I want to make some money on the side, or I want to change my career, or whatever, that's your motivating factor. And then what do you want to do with that? Like, do you want to make client, like, do you want to become like an agency, or like a little web dev shop where you're just, creating client websites? Do you want to create a web application that you can then monetize somehow? Do you want to work at a startup, be their, technical, whatever? Like, it's going to be difficult to figure out exactly what you want to do when you're first starting out, but think about the big picture. Think about what you want out of this, and when you're learning, always be thinking about that in the back of your mind, because that's what kind of gives you that association with the material that you're covering and the end goal. And every time that you're kind of like, okay, I'm learning this new skill, I'm going to be making money or something like that with this skill, you're going to have a way to kind of motivate yourself to go through the next chapter, go through the next task, go through the next project, and retain that information. That was kind of something that was missing for me in high school, I would say. I never made that connection of like, how do I, why am I doing this? It was always just a completionist thing. Like, I need to finish school. I need to finish like university or whatever. Like, it was always a completionist thing. And it's not until I got to like college where I started to put together like, oh, I need this skill. I need to learn this because I want to get this job, or I want to do this thing with my life, right? And as soon as that clicked for me, it was so much easier to spend 6 hours to figure out a stupid pre-lab for digital systems, which is like a ridiculous course that we had to take. But regardless, like, I would have never spent that much time to do anything in high school. I just kind of coasted my way through. Whereas with anything in college or university, I was invested for the most part because, again, I had a direct connection to what I wanted to do with my life.
That's one of the things that I don't like about traditional like learning, and I think it's important, whatever. But I think there's one thing that I don't like is that it feels like a place where you're just trying to do the check marks. Like, even if you're not a completionist per se, there's people in our course that would just coast to get the 50, to get the pass. They wouldn't actually try to get a good grade or whatever, or like try to retain the skills they learned. They would actually just quite literally get just far enough to get the check mark. And so it's like a game to them. It's not a place to learn the skill. And I will say that I'm guilty of that as well, where being like effectively educationally institutionalized your whole life, you go through, in Canada anyway, you go through elementary school, which sometimes has a middle school in there, and then you go through high school, and then you have an optional post-secondary. And one of the things that like we did was, or one of the things that I did was, and like a bunch of people did, is it's just like you're just like, you're forced to be there to do all these subjects. So like Mike's saying, you just coast because you just want to get all this stuff done. And then if you do go to post-secondary immediately after secondary or high school, you're institutionalized to believe that you're just there to get the check mark. Like, if you're a person that, I remember grade 12 was like a big stressor for everyone, where it was like, holy crap, like we have to do really good or else universities won't let us in, right? Universities and post-secondary won't let us in. And so it was like this big stress, right? And people were freaking out. Those people were looking for that 80, 90, whatever. But they weren't looking for that skill. They were looking for the 80 or 90, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If the teacher would just say, I'll just give you 90, that person probably wouldn't study the actual topic. And that's the difference, in my opinion, between institutional learning and non. Like, maybe, and I'm not giving life advice, but like, let's say like maybe there would have been a benefit to like going into the real world for a bit and then like getting a job and then going to post-secondary, because then I would have, like college, then I would have been like, I need to keep these skills. But that mentality that you had, Mike, didn't get into my head until I took a co-op. And then we took a co-op in school, and then I was like, oh damn, like there's a lot of skills that are at use here. Like, I got to know this stuff. And then when I saw those skills at school, then I started to retain them. So like, the earlier you sort of learn that, the better. But it sucks because you, like, school, even though post-secondary is more, or it is, tailored to what you selected, in our case, it's still very much like high school and elementary school in that there's tests, exams, and projects, and you have to do good. And so your goal is to do good, not to learn the skill. Or it can be that, and you'll still do good. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, so you know how like sometimes the people will say like, oh, geniuses, like they just sucked at school. It's probably because they were after the skill or after the thing they were doing, and they didn't care about somebody writing down questions on a piece of paper. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's a weird
metric to measure everyone on.
Yeah,
rather than the actual, like, are they learning anything? And I mean, they're trying to test your knowledge on what you're learning, and giving you grades on that, but it's not a very effective thing. Now, having said that, this is a very difficult topic, because how do you design it? Yeah, how do you design an education system that does not only appeal to everyone's different learning abilities and different learning strategies, but also makes sure that they are actually learning? Because like that's what the testing and assignments are there for, is that the assignments are more there for you to learn. And then the test is there to teach, to test if you're actually learning the material. They don't do it very well. Like, it's just not a great way to do it, because it puts pressure on the wrong spots.
You're cramming for time. Like, oftentimes It's like, well, tomorrow we're on to the next math topic. So if you don't understand how to do this on tonight's homework, good luck.
Yep. Yeah. There's definitely a way to improve it, but I don't have that way. I've thought about that for a long time. I mean,
co-ops is a way. Like, co-ops is a way, because like co-ops bring you into the real world, and you're like, damn. And then like I just said, then I started paying attention more to these specific things. But the thing is this is the difference. Since people listening to this might be getting mad, being like, well, good grades are good. I'm not saying that good grades are bad. What I'm saying is this: if you have a project put at your feet right now where you have to, for example, say, I don't know, Mike, let's just say Mike's a customer. Mike calls me and says, I really need you to set me up with a t-shirt store because my t-shirt store went down. It was on old software and I need a brand new one. There is no grade in which Mike's going to give me. The only thing that matters is me making the t-shirt store. So the skill I need to have is making a t-shirt store. And the result is making the t-shirt store. It's not me striving to get questions right, if that makes sense. Like, the only thing that's going to get me money or get me a good review, good testimonial, is me making something with the skill. But in school, you can shoot for a grade by memorizing things that you don't actually understand to make sure that you can fill in the blanks, true and falses, and long answer questions. And that's how you can kind of get by without the actual skill. I can't remember any math. I can't remember hardly any of it. I kind of remember some, but I would need a serious, I don't know about you, Mike. Could you do Laplace right now?
I would need a serious refresher, like you're saying.
I would need a serious refresher, yeah. Like, and the thing is it's because we don't do it. But like, I mean, like we have web development skills to make that t-shirt store. And so there is no like paper, there is no like paper that we can like, it's not manipulating. I don't really know how to say it, but it's like you're learning for the sake of getting the grade. But in real world, you have the skill to solve the problem or to fix the thing or to build the thing or to maintain the thing. There is no like, hey, you don't know how the hell this generator works, but you got A+ on the generator test. You know what I mean? If that makes sense?
Yep. No,
and
absolutely.
So like, I think that's where like self-taught kind of comes in, because it's like you're more than likely teaching yourself for the real world. And so it's different. It's certainly like self-teaching or like learning even in traditional school that you actually need these skills, like Mike said, is way different than just looking for the next good grade. I think that's the sum up.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. I think that's a good way to sum it up.
Now I don't know if you have any more tips and tricks, Mike. But
no, I think let's move on to the weekly growth goal.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll let Mike go first on this one since I've been blabbing on this whole episode. So take it away, sir. Weekly growth goal.
Yeah. So, last week I said I would do an exercise of some sort every day for the week, and I did do that. It wasn't as good as I thought, but because of the weekly growth goal, I would like, even if I really didn't want to do like a full set of like yoga or a full set of push-ups, sit-ups, or whatever, I'd still go and do something. And I think that did really help a lot with my motivation for exercise. And I think I'm going to keep it up. I'm going to at least do something, whether it be just doing some squats and a few sit-ups and a few push-ups, at least something, but then with the intention of it becoming more routine and more structured down the line, because I just want to get the habit built up first, and then slip in some more structure to that habit. That's my idea for the exercise of every day. And then for this week, I'm going to steal Matt's directly because it's something that we're both going to be doing. It's finish our bookkeeping. We have our year end coming up, and we've got to get everything over to the accountant. So I was going to make this week more about weekly growth goals, because I did make some good progress with that, but I'll save that for next week. But I did say last week that I would have some sort of like estimate for when I will have a beta up, and I think I do have that right now. I believe I should have a beta up in 2 weeks' time. So my next weekly growth goal will probably be finalizing something about that the weekly growth goals app.
Hell yeah! Oh yeah! Well, we'll be looking out for that. Make sure you check out that Trello board. I assume you're keeping that up to date, Mike.
Yes, I am.
So check out that public Trello board if you want to keep track. This is, of course, just an estimate, but a couple weeks, that's exciting. Then we'll have a more official way to discuss our weekly growth goals. Exciting. My weekly growth goal was to work on the media player, and I did exactly that. So I got the play pause working. I had next and previous buttons planned, but like this is on individual pages, so I just scrapped those because I don't think people are going to really use those in these particular contexts. So I think I'm going to scrap those. But I did make it so that you are able to scan through the episode based on where you click on the timeline, which was not a feature of the default one. The default one just had like a visual timeline, and like a fast forward and a reverse. I killed those, and I made it so that you can just like scan through by clicking. And then I have a volume slider that isn't really a slider. You just like click on the slider sort of bar. So I don't know whether I'm going to make it a slider or make it sort of like the Mac where you just like tap like volume up, volume down, because that would be easier just to sort of get this thing out. Because actually one thing I wanted to mention this weekly growth goal is like it sounds like it's easy when I look at the volume part of the HTML5 API or whatever. I'm just like, oh man, the volume's super easy. But then you have to remember that you have to make it into a user interface. So like, do I have like a little ball that you drag? Do I like make it so you just click around? Like the UX actually takes a lot of time, something that I did not consider in this case, but finished most of the media functions. Audio plays, you could skip around, play, pause, change the volume, all digitally, all of that. Now it's time for UX and visuals, UX UI basically, and some functionality as I go through the UX, of course. But yeah, nailed the media player. It looks like crap, but it works, so I'm happy about that. Then I'll be hopefully flying on the rest of the site, because this is, I think, the most complex little piece. So that'd be nice. And my weekly growth goal, just like Mike said, finish bookkeeping. We would really love to work on the Hat website, but we literally need to legally get our bookkeeping done. So I will be doing my bookkeeping, and just getting it up to snuff, basically. That's it. I mean, just that simple. And now, I don't know whether we're going to be doing a web news this week, because this episode was planned for like a rather short period, and then it like became really long because we had lots of good conversations. So keep your eye out on the old RSS feed for a web news. It might be about the whole GameStop situation thing that I'm sure you've heard about. So there's tons of coverage on it anyway, even if we don't cover it. But we might cover that. Just keep an eye out. Not guaranteed. Remember, we are on Patreon. That's patreon.com/HTML, all the things. Check out the tiers, give that a go. Many thanks to our $3 tier patrons. Sean from RabbitWorks JavaScript on youtube.com/RabbitWorks JavaScript. Garrick from Local Path Computing and Web Design on localpathcomputing.com. Ryan Gatchell from Blue Black Digital on blueblackdigital.com. Chris from Self-Made Web Designer on selfmadewebdesigner.com. Tim from The Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com. DL Ford from dlford.io. Bib Hashdash from 9block Media on 9blockmedia.com, and Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you are listening to this on, and this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things Podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media. On Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.